ago, my wife and I recently went to see Star Wars The Last Jedi. And while I had mixed feelings about the movie, I'm still really excited about Star Wars in general. Unfortunately, there aren't many good figures based on Star Wars The Last Jedi for me to review. So today, for my submission to the Zub Collection Club, I'm going to share with you my collection of Boba Fett action figures and other Bounty Hunter action figures from the original Star Wars Trilogy. In this video, I'm also going to show you my custom-made Battle for Boba's Bounty or Bounty Hunter Showdown Diorama that I made to showcase my 3 3/4 inch Star Wars action figures. Unlike most of my dioramas, this isn't based on a scene from a movie or even a comic book. This diorama is based on a loose idea that I had where the other bounty hunters converge on Boba Fett's hideout and try to steal Han Solo away so that they can collect the bounty from Jabba the Hutt. So let's get on with the review. Cheers. Let's kick things off with my collection of Boba Fett action figures. First off, we have the 2010 mail-away rocket-firing Boba Fett figure. It came in one of these white mailer boxes. I was buying a lot of Star Wars figures at the time, so I had lots of proofs of purchase to mail away for this $6 or $7 Boba Fett figure. Here's a loose version of the rocket-firing Boba Fett, which is obviously modeled after the true vintage Boba Fett figure. This is the Boba Fett figure that I played with as a kid. This was a hand-me-down from my brother. And that figure's seen a lot of action. He's got a few paint scuffs here and there, but aside from that, he's in very good shape. And finally, we have the 2011 Vintage Collection Boba Fett in his white prototype armor. Apparently, in the pre-production for Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back, Boba Fett was originally intended to be like a super stormtrooper or something, and his costume was originally going to be all white. This was another mail-away deal. He had to send in several proofs of purchase and $6 or $7 to get these figures. I have a carded example and a loose example here from my Expanded Universe shelf. This is basically just a repaint of the vintage original trilogy collection Boba Fett figure. And just so you don't get screwed over by some jackass on eBay trying to pass off this new rocket-firing Boba Fett for the true vintage Boba Fett figure, you can tell that this newer version on the right is a little bit taller. The sculpted detail is more well defined. The peg holes in the feet of the true vintage version on the left are significantly larger than this new version. And the back of the jetpack on the true vintage version is smooth, whereas this actually does have a rocket firing feature. This rocket is just a plug that fits in there for display, and he also came with a really long rocket that actually does fire from the jetpack. Up next we have the Power of the Force 2 Boba Fett figure on the card and a loose version. This loose version is the variant that has the stripes on the back of his gloves, and the carded version has the solid dots. Little variants like that used to be a big deal back in 1995, but I don't think it really matters anymore in the secondary market. Next we have carded examples of the Legacy Collection Super Articulated Boba Fett figure and the Vintage Collection Super Articulated Boba Fett. And I think those are both just repacked versions of the Vintage Original Trilogy Collection Boba Fett figure. Here I have 2 loose examples of them that I use for dioramas. And then finally this figure is the 5 POA Boba Fett figure that came in a 3-pack with Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader. Up next we have a special edition Boba Fett figure from the year 2000. This is the 300th figure Boba Fett. This is apparently the 300th Star Wars figure that was ever produced by Hasbro and Kenner. He comes in kind of a fancy box. He actually has a rocket firing feature as well. This figure was reissued in the 30th Anniversary Collection Betrayal on Bespin Battle Pack. His articulation leaves a little to be desired, but the sculpted detail on him is really cool, and he has an articulated rangefinder on his helmet. Here we have the Star Wars Black Carded Saga Collection Boba Fett figure. This has an articulated rangefinder also. He has a action feature where you press down on the rocket and he draws his gun. Doesn't work particularly well. The main reason why I like this Boba Fett figure is because he has this flight stand / fire effect that comes out of the jets of his backpack. I think that's really, really cool. The colors on this Boba Fett make him specific to Return of the Jedi. And finally, here we have some Boba Fett figures that I keep with my Expanded Universe collection. First off is the 30th Anniversary Collection Ralph McQuarrie Concept Boba Fett.
with the alternate helmet and the flamethrower effect. And unfortunately that flame effect is really heavy. Sometimes I'll notice it sagging or drooping down a bit, so I unplug it from his wrist gauntlet, rotate it around, and plug it back in to keep it straight. Next up we have the 30th Anniversary Collection animated debut Boba Fett figure. Boba Fett made his first appearance in any kind of media in the Star Wars Holiday Special, which is famous for being terrible. The only part worth checking out is an animated portion featuring Boba Fett. You can probably find that on YouTube. And this is what Boba Fett's costume looks like in the animation. Next up we have the 30th Anniversary Collection Comic 2-Pack Boba Fett, based on a comic book where Boba Fett escapes from the Sarlacc pit after the events of Return of the Jedi. He actually runs across some Jawas who confuse him for a droid. And finally is not actually Boba Fett, it's a whole other character entirely named Judo Cass. Judo Cass uses Mandalorian armor, poses as Boba Fett, using Boba Fett's reputation as a bounty hunter to win contracts. Boba Fett eventually catches up to him and kills him. And this figure was part of the Legacy collection. I think he was a Kmart exclusive. Here's my small IG-88 collection. First off, we have the 1996 Shadows of the Empire comic book 2-pack with another Boba Fett figure. Here we have the Power of the Jedi IG-88 figure, which is a big upgrade from the Shadows of the Empire comic book 2-pack version as far as sculpted detail goes. And in the center we have the vintage Original Trilogy Collection IG-88 figure, which I think was also reissued in the Saga Legends line. This figure is superb. Every time I handle it, I find some new piece of articulation that I didn't know was there before. The amount of detail in the sculpt is amazing. This is one of my top 10 favorite Star Wars action figures of all time. And it makes a lot of the stuff that Hasbro does now with 3 3/4 inch Star Wars figures look like dollar store toys. I would highly recommend it. Here we have the old Kenner Power of the Force 2 Bossk figure from 1996. And here's a couple of loose examples of the vintage Original Trilogy Collection Bossk action figure. This figure was also reissued in the Saga Legends line. I keep this figure in a star case on my wall in my collection room. I use this figure in a Jabba's Palace display. This is the one I use for my Bounty Hunter Showdown Diorama. And I plan on using the Power of the Force 2 version for a future diorama. This vintage Original Trilogy Collection Bossk figure is one of my absolute favorite Star Wars figures. His articulation is excellent, the sculpted and painted detail is very good, and he's one of my favorite creature designs from the original trilogy. Here's my small collection of Dengar figures. In the center is the carded Power of the Force 2 version. Here we have the vintage collection, super articulated version that I use in my Jabba's Palace diorama. And this is the Star Wars Saga Collection Dengar figure. This figure came on a blue card back around the time of Attack of the Clones. And I prefer to use this version of my Bounty Hunter Showdown diorama because the expression on his face is more aggressive. This is my small collection of 4-LOM figures. And this character's name, 4LOM, actually stands for For Love of Money. On the left is the true vintage figure from 1982. In the middle is the carded Power of the Force 2 4-LOM figure. And then on the right is the super articulated 30th Anniversary Collection 4-LOM figure. This vintage 4-LOM or Zuckuss action figure was given to me by my friend Paul, who found him in a thrift store. Older fans and collectors will know this character as Zuckuss, because Kenner accidentally mixed up the names of 4-LOM and Zuckuss on the card backs from the Empire Strikes Back line in the 1980s. Since no one ever calls him by name in the movie, the only way you would have known what to call him was from the action figure card back. So there's a whole generation of Star Wars fans who grew up referring to him as Zuckuss before Lucasfilm corrected Kenner. Even though this Power of the Force 2 4-LOM figure has limited articulation, I still really love the look of him because he has this really nice rusty orange paint wash on him. Eventually I plan on building a diorama based on the scene from Empire where Darth Vader is briefing all the bounty hunters on the Star Destroyer, and I plan on using him for that display. This 30th Anniversary Collection 4-LOM figure has 14 points of articulation, and he's the most movie accurate out of this bunch. That isn't the rifle he originally came with. He originally came with a rifle that looks exactly like the one Dengar carries, and I like to use this one instead because it adds a little variety, and I think this rifle looks a lot more aggressive. And finally, here we have a carded example of the Power of the Force 2 freeze frame Zuckuss figure and the Legacy Collection super articulated Zuckuss figure. I bought the Power of the Force 2 version long before the Legacy version was announced. This is a significant upgrade over the Power of the Force 2 version. He has much better sculpted and painted detail and a soft goods robe. However, I think the painted on weathering is a little heavy-handed. I like to use this Legacy Collection Zuckuss figure for my Bounty Hunter Showdown Diorama, and I plan on using the Power of the Force 2 version for another diorama in the future. The base for this diorama is a slab of inexpensive insulation styrofoam you can find at most hardware stores. I covered the top with sections of sticky back foam sheets to make the floor smooth and look like it's made up of different panels. The weapons rack is 3 sections from a WWE Cage Fight Octagon playset for wrestling figures that I bought on clearance to use as chain link fences and weapons racks like we have here. The guns on the weapons rack are 3 3/4 inch scale Star Wars and G.I. Joe weapons. Most of them came in these cardstock crates that were included as pack-ins for the Star Wars Legacy Saga Legends figures. I hand-painted every one of these guns. At the very least they have a paint wash or they've been dry brushed with silver acrylic paints. But I did paint the stocks, grips, and slings on several of them too. And they've all been super glued to the chain link fence sections. This is the Han Solo and Carbonite block accessory from the Power of the Force 2 figure. And these are actually fuel barrels that came with off-brand G.I. Joe figures that I bought from Big Lots. I painted them gray to make them look like pedestals, and these mini Luke and Han Solo hologram figures were pack-ins that came with the black carded Saga Collection figures. My thought process was maybe Boba Fett uses holograms like this to study his prey whenever he takes on a new contract. But really it's just an excuse for me to use these otherwise useless pack-in minifigures. Finally, this is a Lego or Mega Bloks medieval flag that I got in a box of junk from a yard sale. The base is a wheel from a model tank. I painted the flagpole silver, and I hand-painted the red Bantha Skull logo on the flag. I feel like this could be something that Boba Fett might have hanging in his headquarters. Here's the super articulated Empire Strikes Back Boba Fett figure, ready to defend his bounty. Here's the vintage Original Trilogy Collection IG-88 figure. Here's the super articulated vintage Original Trilogy Collection Bossk figure. Here's the Star Wars blue carded Saga Collection Dengar figure. Here's the super articulated Forlom or Zuckuss figure. And finally here's the Zuckuss or Forlom figure from the Star Wars Legacy line. So overall I'm really happy with these figures, and I'm happy with the way this diorama turned out. I think this is a more fun, exciting way to display them rather than having them lined up on a shelf in neutral poses. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found it entertaining and informative, and maybe you'll be inspired to start your own collection of Bounty Hunter action figures or build your own custom diorama. I think that's all for today, so until next time, take care, and may the Force be with you. Bye.